Hi, welcome to Quiet Law YouTube channel. Close your eyes for a moment, and let the world you know quietly fall away. The hum of the present grows softer. The weight of the day begins to lift, like smoke rising from a dying fire, curling upward into a sky so vast it has no name for where it ends. There is a road waiting for you. It has always been waiting. It was old before the first map tried to trace it, before the first scholar tried to measure it, before the first merchant loaded his first bale of precious cloth onto the broad back of a patient camel and stepped out beyond the edge of everything familiar. This road stretches westward from the heart of an ancient empire, threading through mountains that scrape the belly of the clouds, through deserts where the silence is so complete you can hear your own heartbeat, through oasis cities that rise from the heat like miracles of water and lamplight. It runs for thousands of miles, across the bones of the earth, connecting the east to the west not just with goods and gold, but with ideas, with prayers, with music, with the quiet and extraordinary knowledge that somewhere far away, someone else is also looking up at the same stars. This is the Silk Road, and tonight you are traveling it. There is no urgency here, no schedule to keep. You are simply a traveler moving through time, carried gently forward by the rhythm of hooves on ancient ground, by the whisper of wind across sand that has held the footprints of emperors and monks, of artists and astronomers, of ordinary people making extraordinary journeys. The night is warm and the stars are bright. Let your breathing slow. Let your shoulders drop. Let the sound of distant camel bells find you wherever you are and follow them. The road begins in the east. There is a sound that belongs entirely to this road, a sound you will not hear anywhere else in the world. It is the sound of camel bells. Not loud, not urgent, but constant. A low, hollow ringing that travels ahead of the caravan and lingers behind it, so that the desert always knows something living is moving through. The bells are hung around the necks of the lead camels, and they sway with each long, rolling stride, keeping time with a patience that only animals and ancient things seem to possess. You hear them now, somewhere just ahead in the blue dark before sunrise. The city of Xi'an is behind you, its great walls fading into the pre-dawn haze, its towers and lanterns growing smaller with each step. This city was once called Chang'an, the city of eternal peace, and for centuries it was the largest and most sophisticated city on earth. Over 1 million people lived within its orderly grid of boulevards and markets, its temples and palaces, its foreign quarters where Persian merchants and Byzantine traders and Central Asian musicians all made their homes in the shadow of the Tang dynasty's golden ambition. Departing from Xi'an meant passing through the Great Western Gate, and every merchant who passed through that gate knew that the easy part of the journey was already behind them. The desert wind arrives before the desert does. You feel it now against your face, dry and cool, and carrying with it the faint mineral scent of dust and distance. It comes from the west, from the Gobi and the Taklamakan, from places where the ground holds almost no memory of rain. The Chinese called the Taklamakan by a name that translated, simply and honestly, as the place you go in and do not come out. That name was not meant to frighten travelers away. It was simply the truth, offered plainly as a gift. And yet they went. Generation after generation, they loaded their camels and their horses and their ox carts and they went. The camels move with a steadiness that is almost meditative. Each footfall is deliberate, each stride consuming the earth without haste. The Bactrian camel, the two-humped breed that carried the Silk Road's trade for millennia, is built for exactly this landscape. Its thick coat shields it from cold desert nights, its broad padded feet distribute its weight across loose sand. Its ability to go days without water made it, for these merchants, something between a tool and a miracle. You watch the caravan moving ahead of you in the early morning light, a long dark procession of silhouettes against a sky just beginning to warm at its edges. And there is something deeply calming about the sound and the rhythm of it. Bells and hooves and soft breath. The world reduced to motion and direction. The trails that the caravans followed were not paved roads, not in the way we imagine roads today. They were patterns of use, paths worn into the ground by 10,000 years of feet, paths that shifted slightly with each generation as water sources changed and settlements rose and fell. In some places, the trail narrowed to a single track along the base of a cliff. In others, it spread wide across open desert, a dozen parallel lines pressed into the earth where travelers spread out to avoid each other's dust. Hoofbeats on those sandy trails made almost no sound at all, just a soft percussion, muffled and gentle, like the tapping of fingers on a quiet tabletop. Some travelers walked the entire route. Others rode. Many did neither, traveling only their local section before selling their goods to the next merchant along the chain. Most of what moved along the Silk Road was passed from hand to hand, town to town, each trader carrying goods a few hundred miles before exchanging them and turning for home. In this way, a bolt of silk woven in a workshop outside Chong'an might pass through 20 sets of hands before it finally arrived in Rome, each pair of hands adding a small profit, a small story, a small fragment of the human world to the cloth. Among those goods, the most famous were silk, porcelain, and jade. Silk first. The secret of its making was so fiercely guarded by the Chinese Empire that for centuries, smuggling silkworm eggs out of China carried the death penalty. And yet silk itself traveled freely, wrapped in oilcloth against the desert dust, packed into bundles light enough to be carried, but so valuable that a single bolt could purchase a horse. Merchants who traded in silk grew rich. Empires that controlled the routes grew powerful. The cloth itself, when you held it, felt like holding something that had no right to exist in the physical world, impossibly light, impossibly smooth, catching light as though it were made from it rather than merely reflecting it. Porcelain traveled too, though with considerably more anxiety. The finest Chinese porcelain, pale as winter sky and translucent at its thinnest edges, was packed in straw and sawdust and carried with the kind of careful attention usually reserved for living things. And jade, green and heavy and cool to the touch, carved into pendants and ceremonial objects and small figurines that carried with them the long meditative hours of the craftsmen who made them. These were not merely objects. They were arguments, made in clay and stone and thread, for the sophistication of the civilization that produced them. Imagine now a tea house on the edge of the city. The last one before the road leaves the settled world entirely behind. It is early morning, and the fire has been burning since before dawn. The smell of tea fills the low room, that particular smell of green tea steeping in water, just below the boil, clean and slightly grassy, with something underneath it that is almost sweet. Travelers come here to rest before the long crossing. Some sit in silence, warming their hands around clay cups, staring into the middle distance with the particular expression of people composing themselves for something difficult. Others talk quietly, comparing information about the road ahead. Which wells are reliable this season? Which passes are still blocked? Where the bandits have been seen, and where they have not. A Buddhist monk in saffron robes sits in the corner, eyes half closed, fingers moving slowly over the beads of a rosary. A merchant counts coins on the table before him, lips moving silently. A young boy of perhaps 12, traveling with his uncle for the first time, sits very straight and tries to look as though he has done this before. The tea house will exist here, in some form, for centuries. It is one of the quiet constants of the road. A place to gather, to rest, to hear the news from the direction you have come from, and to share what you know about the direction you are headed. And then, cup by cup, the travelers finish their tea, rise, step back out into the morning air, and continue west. Before Xi'an fell behind entirely, before the settled comforts of the great city gave way to open desert, the road passed through a landscape shaped by faith as much as by stone. The cave temples of Dunhuang, hundreds of miles west of Xi'an, and on the very edge of the Taklamakan desert, represent one of the most astonishing acts of collective devotion in human history. For over 1,000 years, Buddhist pilgrims, merchants, monks, and patrons paid artisans to carve chambers into the soft rock cliffs and fill them with paintings. Not a few paintings, thousands upon thousands of them. Bodhisattvas with serene golden faces. Flying celestial beings with ribbons streaming behind them like frozen music. Scenes from the life of the Buddha rendered in colors ground from malachite and lapis lazuli and cinnabar. Colors so vivid that when the sealed caves were finally rediscovered in the early 20th century, they looked as though they had been painted the previous afternoon. You walk slowly through one of these caves now, in your imagination, in the soft, steady glow of oil lamps. The paintings surround you on every wall, rising to the ceiling. The faces in them are calm. Whatever suffering they depict, whatever longing or devotion they were painted from, they arrive at you now as simply peaceful. as a long accumulated human wish for something gentle and enduring. Further along the cliffs, where the rock is harder and the light falls differently, earlier travelers left their marks in the stone itself. Not paintings, but carvings. Simple inscriptions, some of them. A name, a date, a prayer scratched into the rock face with a chisel or a sharp stone. Others are more elaborate, images of horses, of handprints, of symbols whose exact meaning has been lost, but whose impulse is entirely legible. Someone was here. Someone moved through this place and wanted to leave something of themselves in it. Some small proof of passage. Some quiet words spoken to whatever future traveler might one day run their fingers over these same marks. When the light catches those carvings at the right angle, at dusk or in the long low light of early morning, they seem almost to glow. The cliff face becomes a kind of scripture, written in many languages across many centuries, and what it says, in all of them, is simply this: I came this way. I was alive. I was here. And now you are here too. The bells are still ringing, somewhere ahead in the blue distance. The desert stretches westward in every direction, vast and quiet, and holding its breath. The stars overhead are the same stars that lit the way for every traveler who walked this ground before you, steady and patient and offering, as they always have, a kind of orientation that has nothing to do with maps. You are on the road now. Let it carry you forward. The desert does not announce itself. It simply arrives, the way sleep arrives, gradually, and then completely, until you look around and realize the world has been transformed while you were not paying attention. The last scrub grasses thinned an hour ago. The last farmhouse disappeared behind a fold in the land. Now there is only sand and sky, and the long caravan moving through the middle of both, small as a thread drawn across an enormous canvas. The silence here is not empty. It is full of wind, full of the sound of sand shifting against itself, full of the particular quality of space that only truly open places possess, a sense that the world has taken a long, slow breath and is holding it. The dunes come first as low ripples, modest suggestions of what the desert can do when it applies itself. Then they grow. By mid-afternoon they rise on either side of the track like slow frozen waves, their crests sharp as blades against the blue sky, their windward faces smooth and pale, their lee sides soft and shadowed. The sand here is not coarse. It is fine as flour, fine as ground glass, fine enough that it finds its way into everything, into the folds of your clothing, into the corners of your eyes, into the small spaces between your thoughts. And it whispers. That is the only word for the sound it makes as the wind moves across it. A low continuous sound, almost below hearing, almost felt more than heard, like the murmuring of a very large congregation at prayer. The dunes shift over years and decades, moving slowly westward, swallowing old roads, and occasionally revealing them again, burying the ruins of caravanserais and then, a century later, uncovering them once more. The desert has a long memory. It simply keeps everything, holds everything, returns everything in its own time. At night the dunes become something else entirely. As the sun drops and the temperature falls with a speed that always surprises newcomers, the sand releases the warmth it has been storing all day, and the air above it shimmers faintly. The sharp crests of the dunes soften in the low light. The shadows between them deepen from blue to violet to a darkness that seems almost liquid. And then the stars come out. There is no darkness on Earth quite like desert darkness, and there are no stars quite like desert stars. Without the haze of humidity, without the interference of light from any human settlement, the sky above the Taklamakan on a clear night is not merely full of stars. It is made of them. The Milky Way does not appear as a faint suggestion, a rumor of light across the sky. It appears as a river, a road, a luminous highway arching from one horizon to the other with such density and brightness that it casts a faint shadow on the sand below. The caravan's navigators knew this sky the way a reader knows a familiar page. Every star had a name, a history, a relationship to the other stars around it. The great constellations served as landmarks as reliable as any mountain or river, fixed points in a rotating sky from which a skilled navigator could determine direction, estimate latitude, even judge the time of night with reasonable accuracy. On a clear night in the open desert, a caravan did not need to stop. It simply followed the stars. Chief among them was the pole star. For travelers in the northern hemisphere, across the full breadth of the Silk Road's reach, the The pole star was the one fixed point in all of creation. While every other star wheeled slowly overhead in its great nightly arc, Polaris held its position above the northern horizon with an absolute stillness that must have seemed, to ancient travelers, nothing short of miraculous. It did not rise. It did not set. It simply waited there, night after night, season after season. A steady lamp hung at the roof of the world. Navigators would take its measure last thing before sleep, and first thing upon waking, checking that the caravan had not drifted in the night. Merchants would glance up at it during a rest stop the way a modern traveler might glance at a phone, a quick orientation, a small reassurance. And sometimes, on a quiet night when the caravan had made camp and the fire had burned low and the world was very still, a traveler would simply lie on their back in the warm sand and watch it. Not for navigation, not for any practical purpose at all, just to watch it, just to feel, for a moment, the strange comfort of a thing that does not change. You watch it now. It hangs above the northern horizon, steady and small and entirely reliable. The rest of the sky turns slowly around it, the great wheel of the heavens completing its ancient rotation, but Polaris holds. It will be there tomorrow night, and the night after, long after this caravan has reached its destination, long after all its travelers have completed their journeys and returned to whatever places they called home. Polaris will still be there, calm above the desert, watching. Then, as if the sky has decided that stillness alone is not enough for one night, a streak of light crosses the darkness. A meteor, there and gone in less than a second, a thread of brightness pulled across the stars so quickly that you are not entirely sure you saw it. Then another. Then three more in quick succession, each one brief and brilliant, each one leaving behind a faint impression on the eye, a ghostly afterimage that fades almost before you can name it. Meteor showers visited the desert travelers with the same regularity as the seasons. The Perseids in August, the Leonids in November, the Geminids in December, each shower arriving on schedule like a caravan from another part of the cosmos entirely. Travelers who had made the crossing many times knew when to expect them, and would mention it to first-timers as a thing worth staying awake for. And it was. Even now, even knowing what meteors are, knowing that they are fragments of rock and ice burning up in the atmosphere, even with all of that knowledge, the sight of a meteor shower above a dark desert retains something of its oldest power. Something that makes the body go still, and the breath slow, and the thinking mind step briefly aside. The camp is quiet now. Most of the caravan is asleep, wrapped in heavy blankets against the desert cold, their forms scattered around the low embers of the fire like stones. But not everyone sleeps. One of the drovers is awake, sitting with his back against a sitting camel, and from somewhere in the darkness near him comes the sound of a flute. A reed flute, thin and breathy and unhurried. A simple melody that keeps circling back to the same 3 or 4 notes, the way a thought keeps returning when the mind is half asleep. It is not quite music in the formal sense. It is more like breathing given a shape. The drover plays it softly, not performing, just accompanying the night, and the camel behind him shifts its weight and settles, and is still. Somewhere a donkey brays, the sudden loud complaint of an animal that has found something worth complaining about, and then falls silent. The sound carries a remarkable distance in the cold desert air, bouncing off the dune faces, arriving from what seems like several directions at once before it finally fades. Silence rushes back in to fill the space it left. And then from further away, from the dark rim of the desert where the dunes give way to stony plain, comes a sound that is at once more beautiful and more unsettling. A howl, long and wavering, and answered almost immediately by another, slightly different in pitch, and then a third, until there are perhaps 4 or 5 voices woven together in the darkness, rising and falling, before they fade as gradually as they began. The wolves of the desert were a constant companion to caravan travelers. They followed at a respectful distance, drawn by the smell of the animals and the leavings of camp. Experienced travelers knew to keep the animals tethered close at night, and to keep the fire burning, and generally the wolves kept their distance, observing with their pale eyes from the edge of the firelight. Their howling at night was simply part of the desert's voice, one thread among many in the long dark conversation between all the living things that moved through this empty land. Above the camp, a shape crosses the stars, large and silent, banking on a thermal with an unhurried confidence. a falcon or perhaps a large eagle, riding the cold night air with its wings held wide and still. During the day, the falconers of the caravans flew their birds at the small game that skittered between the scrub at the desert's edges, the practice providing both sport and supplementary food for the long crossing. But at night the birds sat hooded on their perches, and only the wild raptors moved, their shadows passing briefly across the stars, their hunts conducted in silence. The flute plays on, circling its small melody around those same few notes. The fire breathes out a last small curl of smoke. The wolf song has faded to nothing, or perhaps it was never entirely real. Perhaps it was just the wind finding a new shape in the dunes. A nomad traveler near the edge of the camp begins to sing, very quietly, in a language that most of the caravan does not share. It is a herding song, the kind sung to keep animals calm, the kind passed from parent to child across so many generations that it has worn smooth with use, all unnecessary edges gone, only the essential curve of it remaining. There is no drama in it, only a long, patient tenderness, offered to the night and the desert and the cold stars overhead. Let that song find you where you are. Let the desert hold you in its enormous, quiet hand. The road continues westward. The stars will slowly overhead. And somewhere, carried on the same wind that moves the dunes, the bells of the lead camels ring softly in the dark. You smell it before you see it. Water first, that clean mineral coolness that the desert dry air carries from a surprising distance. Then something green underneath it, the particular freshness of living plants, of roots in soil, of shade and moisture, and the patient accumulation of growth. And then faintly something sweeter still. Blossoms. Fruit. The warm golden richness of orchards that have been tended for 1,000 years. The oasis arrives like a slow exhale. The hard pale ground softens almost imperceptibly at first, small tufts of grass appearing between the stones, then taller growth, then the first low trees casting the first real shade you have encountered in days. The camels sense the change and move with something that might, if you are generous, be called eagerness. Their pace quickens just slightly. Their great heads lift. The bells around their necks ring a little faster, a small bright quickening of the rhythm that has been your constant companion through the desert. Then the oasis opens before you in its fullness, and you stop walking, simply to take it in. Green. After so many days of ochre and pale sand and the blinding white of salt flats, the sheer intensity of the green is almost startling. Poplars, their leaves trembling in the lightest breath of air, line the watercourses that thread between the fields. Willows trail their fingers in the irrigation channels. And rising beyond them, in long ordered rows that speak of centuries of careful cultivation, the orchards begin. The pomegranate trees are in a state of extravagant generosity. Their branches bend under the weight of fruit the color of dark garnets, each one a tight sphere of concentrated sweetness, the skin beginning to split at the very ripest where the flesh inside has pushed beyond what the skin can contain. The tree is ancient, older than the Silk Road itself, cultivated in this part of the world for so long that it appears in art and myth and prayer with the ease of something that belongs there absolutely, a symbol of abundance and fertility and the extraordinary productivity of land that has water and attention lavished upon it in equal measure. A worker moves between the trees, lifting the heaviest pomegranates gently, testing the weight of them in a cupped hand before deciding whether to harvest or wait one more day. The same gesture, you suspect, that their grandmother made, and their grandmother's grandmother before that. Some knowledge lives not in books but in hands, passed down through the seasons, as reliable as the trees themselves. Nearby, on flat clay rooftops and long wooden drying racks arranged to catch the maximum sun, the apricots are laid out in their thousands. They arrived on the trees weeks ago as small hard green spheres, and have been ripening through the long summer into deep amber and orange. And now the harvest is nearly complete. Sliced and pitted, they are set out to dry in the sun until they become the dense, intensely flavored dried fruit that will sustain caravan travelers through the barren months ahead, packed into cloth bags and traded all along the road. The smell of them drying is extraordinary, a warm caramelized sweetness that is somehow also tart, a smell that promises sustenance and pleasure in equal measure. The Silk Road's caravans depended on the oasis orchards as surely as they depended on their camels. Dried fruit provided calories that survived the journey, that did not require the precious water needed to cook grain. that could be eaten in the saddle without pause. Apricots, figs, dates, raisins. All of them traveled the road tucked into saddlebags alongside silk and jade and spice. And in doing so, they traveled further than any single piece of fruit had any right to travel. In the pistachio groves at the edge of the settlement, the afternoon light is green and shifting. The trees are old, their trunks twisted into shapes that suggest long conversations with wind and drought. Their branches spread wide in the manner of trees that have never been crowded, that have had the space to grow into their full and particular shape. The nuts are ripening, just beginning to split along their seams, the green and purple of the shells giving way to the pale cream of the kernel inside. There is a sound in the pistachio grove that exists nowhere else. When the afternoon breeze moves through the branches, the leaves and the small hard fruits together produce a dry, delicate rustling, lighter than rain, steadier than wind, a continuous soft percussion that is more felt than heard. Travelers who rested in these groves on their way through the oasis often spoke of the sound in their accounts, not because it was dramatic, but because it was so entirely itself, so specific and unrepeatable, the sound of this place and no other place on earth. You sit in the shade of one of the older trees and listen to it now. The rustling continues above you, unhurried and complete. A small bird crosses the grove, pausing on a branch for a moment before moving on. Somewhere farther into the orchard, someone is singing softly at their work. The almond trees, which in this part of the world bloom in late winter while the desert is still cold and the mountains still hold their snow, have long since set their fruit and given way to the main season's abundance. But the memory of their flowering clings to this place the way certain memories cling to particular rooms. Travelers who had passed through in that earlier season always spoke of it, of arriving at the oasis in the grey cold of February and finding the almond orchards in full bloom, every branch laden with small white and pale pink flowers, filling the air with a scent so delicate that you thought you had imagined it, and then breathed deeper to confirm that you had not. The bees that worked those blossoms are still here, moving between the later flowering plants with the calm efficiency of creatures that have a clear and sufficient purpose. Their hum in the warmth of the afternoon is one of the oldest sounds associated with settled human life, the sound of fertility and sweetness, and the patient transformation of one thing into another. Then there is saffron. In the fields at the edge of the oasis, where the irrigated land meets the dry ground, and the soil is neither too wet nor too poor, the saffron crocus grows in long, careful rows. The harvest comes in autumn, when the pale purple flowers open for just a few days. And during those days, everyone who can work does, rising before dawn to collect the blooms before the sun opens them too wide, sitting cross-legged in the early morning light to pluck the 3 crimson stamens from each flower with careful fingers. The stamens will be dried and sold, at prices that reflect both their extraordinary flavor and the extraordinary amount of labor required to produce even a small quantity of them. But it is the color of saffron that stays with you. The dried threads are a deep, vivid orange-red that seems almost to contain its own light, and when they are steeped in warm water or broth, they release a golden yellow that colors everything it touches with a warmth that seems almost edible in itself. The merchants who carried saffron along the Silk Road were carrying something that was simultaneously a spice, a dye, a medicine, and a luxury, something so concentrated in its qualities that a tiny amount could transform a large quantity of food or cloth. The oasis town itself settles into the comfortable rhythms of late afternoon as the caravan makes camp in the designated travelers' quarter. Water is drawn and carried. Animals are watered and fed and tethered. The dust of the journey is shaken from clothing and rinsed from faces. Small transactions take place at the edges of the market, a measure of dried apricots exchanged for a length of rope, a handful of pistachios traded for information about the road ahead, the quiet commerce of people who understand the value of things because they have carried them a long way. Children appear, as children always do, drawn by the novelty of the caravan. They stand at a distance first, watching the strange animals and stranger people with wide, serious eyes, then gradually drift closer, until the most courageous among them are close enough to touch the hem of a traveler's robe before darting back to the safety of their companions, breathless with their own daring. An older woman at the edge of the market watches all of this with an expression of calm amusement. She has lived here her entire life and has watched caravans arrive and depart through every season of every year she can remember. She knows the road through its travelers, knows its difficulties and its rhythms and its surprises, not from having walked it herself, but from having listened carefully to everyone who has. She is, in her way, as much a repository of the road's knowledge as any merchant or navigator. As the light fails and the cooking fires are lit, the oasis releases the particular fragrance of evening in a warm, well-watered place. With smoke and water and blossoms, the smell of food being prepared, the smell of animals settling, the smell of the desert a short distance away, held at bay by the invisible boundary of moisture and cultivation. It is a smell that means arrival. It means rest. It means, for a little while at least, that the road is behind you and the road ahead can wait. Let the evening settle around you like something warm. Let the sound of the irrigation channels, the soft constant voice of moving water, fill the spaces between your thoughts. You have come a long way. You have earned this rest. The fire has been burning for an hour before the music begins. It starts simply, as music on the road always does, not with any announcement or performance, but with a single person sitting close to the warmth and picking up an instrument, because the evening is long and the night is beautiful, and there is no better way to say so. The campfire glow is its own country. Within its radius, the vast dark of the open land is held briefly at bay, and the faces gathered around it are softened, made amber and shadow, given back something of the warmth that the journey has asked of them. The fire pops and shifts, sending small galaxies of sparks upward into the darkness where they rise, brighten for a moment, and then go out. You watch them the way you might watch falling stars, that same involuntary attention, that same small quiet feeling of something beautiful being briefly present and then gone. People drift toward fire the way water drifts toward low ground. By the time the cooking is done and the bowls are set aside, the circle around this fire has expanded considerably from the original handful who made camp here. There are merchants from Chong'an who speak the Sogdian trade language with a comfortable fluency earned from decades on the road. There are Persian traders carrying bolts of embroidered cloth, their speech musical with the cadences of a language shaped by a very different landscape. There are Buddhist pilgrims heading east toward the great monasteries of China, their robes dusty from the road, their expressions serene with the particular contentment of people engaged in a journey they believe entirely in. And there are nomads, drawn to the warmth and the company from their own camp a short distance away, sitting slightly apart in the manner of people who are accustomed to open space and hold a little of it around them, even in company. The lute player begins. It is a long-necked lute, the kind that in this part of the world goes by many names in many languages, its body carved from a single piece of mulberry wood, its strings of twisted gut, its neck so long that the highest notes it can reach seem almost to thin the air. The player sits cross-legged, the instrument held close, and plays a melody so old that no one living knows who composed it or in what century it first found its shape. It moves slowly. There is no urgency in it. The melody rises and falls and rises again like breathing, like the dunes, like the long, slow rhythms of a journey measured in weeks rather than hours. The lute's tone in the open air has a quality it does not have indoors, a kind of transparency, each note fully formed and then released, not bouncing off walls or ceilings, but simply traveling outward until the dark absorbs it. The people around the fire listen, without performing their listening. Eyes half closed, hands still, bodies relaxed into the posture of people who have nowhere to be for the next several hours and are grateful for it. Then the ney joins. The ney is a reed flute, one of the oldest instruments in human history, little more than a length of hollow reed with finger holes cut into it. But what comes out of it when it is well played carries something of the reed's own nature, something of the marshy riverbank where it grew, something of the cutting and the shaping that separated it from its roots. There is a mournfulness in the ney that is not sadness exactly, more like longing, the particular quality of something that knows it has been separated from its origin and has found a way to make that separation beautiful. The ney player and the lute player do not look at each other. They do not need to. The music they are making is not arranged or rehearsed. It is found. The way two people walking in the same direction will naturally fall into step without deciding to. The melody the ney carries is the same melody the lute introduced, but transformed, stretched thinner, made more plaintive, the intervals between the notes charged with an ache that the lute, warmer and rounder in its tone, only suggested. Around the fire, something happens that happens only with music. The separate individuals begin to become, briefly, a group. The merchants from different cities, the pilgrims from different traditions, the nomads from the open steppe, all of them sharing for a moment the same sound, carried on the same air, warmed by the same fire. The road is full of difference, full of languages that cannot speak to each other and customs that perplex and beliefs that diverge, and the road asks travelers to navigate all of that difference every day. But music moves across those distances with an ease that language never quite manages. You do not need to understand the words of a song to feel what it is offering. A drum joins the circle now. Not a grand ceremonial drum, but a simple frame drum, held in one hand and tapped with the fingertips of the other. Its skin slightly slack from the damp evening air, its tone low and resonant. It enters gently, finding the pulse of what the lute and ney have already established, not imposing a new rhythm, but revealing the one that was always underneath the melody. The fire responds, it seems, brightening slightly as though pleased by the company. The drum does not dominate. It holds. This is what the best percussion does on a night like this. It holds the space open for everything else. It creates a floor that the melody can rest on and rise from. By the time the drumming has been present for a few minutes, the music feels as though it has always had this shape, as though the melody could not exist without this quiet heartbeat beneath it. Then, gradually, the music fades. Not abruptly, not with a final note that declares itself an ending, but in the way all things seem to end on the road at night, gradually, and then gently, until you realize some time after that it has stopped, and the silence that follows it carries the warmth of what just happened still inside it. The horses are tethered at the edge of the camp, and in the quiet after the music, you can hear them. The soft sound of their breathing, the occasional swish of a tail against a flank, the small stamp of a hoof against the ground. Their manes move in the light night wind. One of them exhales, a long slow breath that sounds almost contemplative, and turns its large dark eye toward the fire for a moment before looking away. The horses of the Silk Road were not the heavy draft horses of the colder climates to the north and west. They were the Fergana horses, the famous heavenly horses that the Han Dynasty emperors coveted so deeply that they sent military expeditions thousands of miles to obtain them. These were animals of extraordinary beauty and stamina, tall and fine-boned, and seemingly lit from within by some quality that made them unlike any other horses their owners had seen. They were traded, gifted, stolen, celebrated in paintings and bronze, and carried along the Silk Road as living treasures, their value sometimes exceeding that of the goods packed in the saddlebags on their backs. But the working horses of the ordinary caravan were simply horses, valued for their reliability, their patience, their willingness to carry a load through difficult country without complaint. And at night, tethered and fed and resting, they brought their own kind of calm to the camp, their warm animal presence a simple comfort in the cold and open dark. Beyond the horses, at the far edge of the firelight, where the camp gives way to the open land, a group of yaks stands in a loose cluster, their thick coats stirring in the breeze. Yaks were the draft animals of the high-altitude routes, the mountain crossings that connected the main road to the communities of Tibet and the Himalayan foothills. Their broad bodies and slow metabolism perfectly suited to cold and altitude that would distress animals adapted for lower ground. At rest, their low continuous sound, a deep resonant lowing that carries through the cold air, is one of the most deeply peaceful sounds in the natural world. Not the sound of distress or demand, but simply the sound of large warm creatures breathing together in the dark, present and content, and entirely sufficient. One of the nomad travelers near the edge of the group has begun to sing quietly, almost to himself, a soft wordless melody that matches the rhythm of the dying fire. Others around him are lying down now, wrapped in heavy felt blankets, their breathing slowing towards sleep. The fire settles into itself, its flames dropping lower, the wood collapsing into glowing coals that will hold their heat for hours. The road has given everything it has to give today. The miles behind you have been folded into you now, become part of what you carry, part of what you know. And the miles ahead can wait, patient as the desert, patient as the stars, until morning comes again with its slow gold light and its quiet invitation to continue. For now, there is only this: the warmth of the fire, the sound of breathing, human and animal, rising and falling together, the soft knock of the horses' hooves on the earth, and the yaks lowing once, quietly, and then going still. The nomad's song trails off into nothing, or perhaps into something, into the silence that holds all the songs that have ever been sung on this road, all the melodies that have risen from these camps across 1,000 years of nights exactly like this one. Let your own breath slow to match it. Let the fire keep its watch. You are safe here, in the company of all these travelers, in the warmth of this ancient road. Let the night take you gently. Let the road carry you forward while you sleep. There are cities that exist because of geography, placed at river crossings or natural harbors, or the mouths of mountain passes, by the simple logic of terrain. And then there are cities that exist because of human will, cities that grew up in places that had no obvious reason to become cities at all, except that enough people decided to stop there, to trade there, to build there, until stopping became a tradition, and the tradition became a foundation, and the foundation became something extraordinary. The great cities of the Silk Road were mostly this second kind. You hear Kashgar before you fully arrive in it. The sound builds gradually as you approach from the eastern desert, beginning as a low undifferentiated hum, a sound too complex and layered to be any single thing, and resolving slowly into its components as the distance closes. Voices, animals, the percussion of metalwork, the creak of wooden cartwheels on stone, the sound of a city alive and fully engaged in the transaction of human life. Kashgar sits at the point where the northern and southern routes around the Taklamakan desert come back together, which means that everything traveling west on the road passed through it, and everything traveling east passed through it too, and the city grew fat and brilliant on this geography of convergence. For over 2,000 years, it was one of the great markets of the world, a place where a merchant from China might stand in the same bazaar as a merchant from Persia, where a Buddhist monk and an Islamic scholar might sit on adjacent steps in the same shade, where the accumulated goods and knowledge of half the known world were available, if you knew where to look and had something worth trading. The silk stalls are where the senses first surrender. The bolts of cloth are stacked on wooden frames, or hung in long vertical falls that catch the morning light and translate it into color. Reds deep as pomegranate seeds, blues that range from the pale gray of a winter sky to the saturated midnight of a dyer's most ambitious work. Greens, yellows, the warm cream of undyed silk, the metallic shimmer of cloth woven with actual gold thread that catches the light with a different quality entirely, not reflecting but gathering it, holding it, offering it back changed. Running your hand along the edge of a bolt of good silk is an experience that defies practical description. It is simply smooth in a way that no other material is smooth, and warm in a way that no other material is warm, and light in a way that makes you feel, briefly, that weight itself might be optional. The merchants who sold silk knew exactly what they had. They handled it without ceremony, unrolling lengths with the casual expertise of people who have done this 10,000 times, holding cloth up to the light to show its quality, offering small samples for the buyer to take away and consider. But underneath the professional manner was always a knowledge that they were handling something genuinely rare, genuinely extraordinary, something that the rest of the world wanted with a desire that the makers of silk had been sustaining and cultivating for centuries. The spice market occupies a different quarter of the bazaar, and you know when you have entered it by smell alone, long before any stall comes into view. The smell of a spice market is not a single smell. It is a layered thing, a stratigraphy of fragrance in which individual notes rise and fall as you move through it. Cinnamon from the south, its bark rolled into scrolls and piled in open sacks, releasing a warm sweetness into the air. Black pepper from India, so valuable at certain points in history that it was used as currency, its sharp dusty fragrance cutting through the sweeter notes around it. Cardamom, green and intensely aromatic, the kind of smell that arrives in the back of the mouth as well as the nose. Cloves, dark and oil-rich, their smell so strong it can be tasted. And underlying all of it, the deep warm bass note of cumin and coriander and dried ginger, the fundamental chord upon which all the higher notes are built. The spice merchants measure their goods with small brass scales, their weights polished smooth from years of handling, their movements precise and unhurried. They have been doing this long enough that the measurements are in their hands more than in their heads, a kind of knowledge that lives in the body and does not require conscious attention. They talk while they work, keeping up a continuous conversation with customers and neighbors and passers-by. The market as much a social institution as a commercial one. a place where news is exchanged alongside goods, where the state of the road and the mood of distant courts and the price of silk in cities 2 months' journey away are all discussed and debated and measured against what was believed to be true last season. Beyond the covered bazaar, the architecture of the great Silk Road cities announces itself with a confidence that has not diminished across the centuries. The blue-tiled cities. That is what travelers coming from the east and west alike wrote about in their accounts. Again and again, the blue tiles. The great mosques and madrasas of Samarkand and Bokhara were faced in a blue that seems, even now, even in descriptions or in the faded remnants that survive, barely possible. It is the blue of a clear sky reflected in still water. It is the blue of distance. It was achieved through a chemistry that the tile makers of Central Asia developed over centuries, combining cobalt and other minerals with glazes and firing temperatures that produced a color so saturated and luminous that European travelers who first encountered it sometimes wrote accounts that their contemporaries found difficult to believe. Samarkand, under the great conqueror and patron Timur in the 14th century, was rebuilt on a scale intended to announce to the world that this city was the center of everything. Its Registan, the great public square flanked by 3 enormous madrasas, each covered in those extraordinary tiles, was designed not merely to be functional, but to be overwhelming, to produce in the visitor a feeling of smallness in the face of human achievement that was, paradoxically, elevating. To stand in it was to feel both diminished and expanded, as though the scale of what human hands had built here was an argument for the dignity of human hands in general. But the cities held more intimate beauties too. In a quiet workshop off a side street in Bokhara, an old craftsman is working on a walnut shell. This sounds absurd until you see what he is doing. He is carving it, with tools finer than most eyes can follow at first glance, cutting patterns into the hard ridged surface of the shell with a patience and precision that belongs to another relationship with time entirely. The finished pieces will be threaded on silk cord, or worked into jewelry, or simply kept as objects of pure impractical beauty, small miracles of human attention applied to something the world considers waste. His hands do not hurry. His hands have never hurried. This kind of work cannot be hurried. It can only be done at the pace it requires, and the craftsman learned that pace so long ago that it has become his natural speed, the tempo at which he moves through the world. Across the city, in a workshop where the sound of the loom is the constant bass note of every hour, the carpet weavers are at their work. The great woolen carpets of Central Asia were among the most celebrated goods on the Silk Road, their patterns encoding information about the tribes and traditions that produced them, their colors achieved through dyes derived from plants and insects, their constructions so labor-intensive that a single large carpet represented months of a skilled weaver's life. The patterns that covered them were not decorative in the simple sense. They were a kind of writing, a visual language in which certain geometric forms and certain color relationships carried meanings that the weaver's community understood, messages about identity and protection and beauty woven into the structure of the thing itself. The weaver works from memory and from a pattern in her mind's eye that she does not need to reference on paper because it has been part of her since childhood. Her hands move along the row with a quick, practiced rhythm, knotting individual threads of wool around the warp strings, each not a single pixel in a picture that will only become fully visible when the carpet is complete and unrolled and seen from a distance. There is something deeply satisfying about watching work that is this honest, this direct, this fully present in its own nature. The lacquer box craftsmen work in the dim cool of their workshops through the heat of the afternoon. The boxes they make are small enough to hold in a palm, their surfaces covered in lacquer applied in dozens of thin layers, each layer dried completely before the next is added, a process that takes months for a single piece. The finished surface is polished to a depth that seems impossible in something flat, a depth that appears to contain light rather than simply reflect it. Scenes are painted onto this surface in fine brushwork, landscapes and figures and stylized animals, the painting executed in a tradition so old and refined that each brushstroke carries behind it the accumulated intelligence of every brushstroke made before it. And then the glass beads. Glass bead making arrived on the Silk Road from the west, from the glassmakers of Phoenicia and later of Venice and Egypt, and it traveled east and was taken up and transformed by the craftsmen of Central Asia into something distinctly their own. The beads were small enough to be strung in hundreds, each one slightly irregular in the way of handmade things. Their colors achieved by mixing metal oxides into the molten glass in combinations the makers guarded carefully. Cobalt for blue, copper for green, gold for red. Strung on silk thread, they caught the light as their wearer moved and scattered it in small soft bursts, and they traveled the road in small cloth bags because they were light, compact, durable, and universally desired, currencies of beauty that passed without difficulty across every cultural and linguistic boundary the road presented. The afternoon light is lowering now across the rooftops of the city, catching the blue tiles and turning them briefly to gold, finding the glass beads laid out on a merchant's cloth and filling each one with a small concentrated fire. The bazaar is beginning to quiet, the most active hours of trade giving way to the slower rhythms of late afternoon. Merchants cover their stalls with cloth. Craftsmen set aside their tools. The smell of evening cooking begins to rise from the houses behind the market. You sit for a moment at the edge of a fountain in the center of the bazaar and let the city settle around you. All of this, you think, all of this grew up here in the middle of the world because people kept moving through it and stopping, because the road made it necessary and the human need for beauty made it inevitable. The silk and the spice and the tiles and the carpets and the carved walnut shells and the glass beads, all of them expressions of the same impulse. The impulse to take the materials the world offers and make them into something that the world did not contain before. The fountain plays on, its water catching the last of the afternoon light. The road continues westward. Not everything that traveled the Silk Road could be weighed on a merchant's scale. The most important things that moved along this road had no weight at all. They were carried in the minds of travelers, in the pages of manuscripts bundled carefully into saddlebags, in the prayers said at dawn before the journey resumed, in the conversations held around campfires in a dozen different languages, in the drawings made by scholars attempting to describe the shape of the world to people who had never seen the parts of it being described. Ideas are the lightest cargo, and they travel further than silk. The road was a place of extraordinary religious plurality, and nowhere was this more apparent than in the cities where travelers from many different traditions rested and traded and worshipped side by side. Christianity came to Central Asia earlier than most people realize, not the Christianity of Rome and Constantinople, but the Christianity of the East, the Nestorian Church whose missionaries traveled the Silk Road with the same determination as any merchant, establishing communities of faith in cities all the way to China itself. In the fading light of a late afternoon, the shadow of a Nestorian cross falls across the stone of an old church in a Silk Road city. Its shape simple and clean, the cross that to these travelers represented the absolute center of everything. The Nestorian Christians believed, in ways that set them apart from the Western Church, that Christ was fully human and fully divine in a manner that kept these two natures more distinct than Rome was comfortable with, and this theological difference had sent them eastward, away from the centers of orthodox power, and into the margins of the known world, where they built something quiet and enduring. Their presence along the road is attested in stone and script and the occasional grave marker, small crosses cut into the rock of cliff faces, inscriptions in Syriac, the liturgical language of the Eastern Church, found as far east as the borders of China. They were merchants as well as missionaries, teachers as well as traders, and the communities they planted along the road maintained themselves for centuries, quiet lights in a vast and various darkness. Not far from the Nestorian Church, in a caravanserai where the lamplight is warm and the evening is long, a traveler is reading from a scroll. The text is Manichaean, the scripture of a faith that was born in 3rd century Persia in the mind of a prophet named Moni, who had a vision of a cosmic struggle between light and darkness, so comprehensive and so philosophically sophisticated that it found adherents across an enormous range of cultures and centuries. Manichaeism absorbed elements of Christianity and Buddhism and Zoroastrianism and shaped them into something entirely its own, a religion of extraordinary intellectual ambition that at its height had followers from the Atlantic coast of Europe to the Pacific edge of China. The scroll the traveler reads from is illustrated, the text accompanied by paintings executed in colors so fine and so well preserved that they still glow in the lamplight. The images depict the journey of light through the world, the slow, laborious process by which the divine spark trapped in matter makes its way back toward its source. It is a cosmology of extraordinary scope and strangeness, and the traveler reading it has been reading it for years and still finds new depths in it. Still arrives at passages that stop him and make him sit quietly for a long time before continuing. Manichaeism did not survive as a living religion, but it left traces everywhere it had been, not just in its own texts, but in the thought of every tradition it had touched, a kind of invisible influence that persisted long after the faith itself had faded. Then the call to prayer comes. It comes from the direction of the mosque, a single voice rising into the evening air with a clarity and a carrying power that seems to belong to a different register than ordinary sound. The muezzin's call is not merely an announcement. It is a musical act of a very particular kind, a performance of faith so practiced and so refined that the voice itself becomes an instrument. Its rises and falls shaped by a tradition of singing that is centuries old and as carefully cultivated as any other musical form on earth. The call moves through the city, finding its way down every alley and across every rooftop, entering every room and courtyard, inviting and insisting at once. Those who are going to pray begin moving toward the mosque. Those who are not stand still for a moment in the beauty of the sound before continuing what they were doing. Even travelers of entirely different faiths, the Buddhist monks and the Nestorian Christians and the Zoroastrian fire worshippers, tend to pause when the call comes, not out of religious obligation, but out of an instinctive recognition of something being offered to the sky with great seriousness and great care. The call fades. The evening reassembles itself around its absence. On a wooden table in the workshop of an astronomer in Bokhara, a brass astrolabe catches the lamplight and scatters it in small bright arcs across the ceiling. The astrolabe is one of the most beautiful instruments ever made by human hands, and it is also one of the most useful. It is a map of the sky compressed onto a flat disk, a model of the celestial sphere that can be used to determine the position of the sun and stars at any time of day or night, to calculate the time, to find the direction of Mecca for prayer, to determine one's latitude, to predict the rising and setting of celestial bodies, and to solve a range of astronomical problems that would otherwise require laborious mathematical calculation. The astronomers of the Islamic world, who developed and refined the astrolabe through the 8th, 9th, and 10th centuries, were doing something that changed the relationship between human beings and the sky. They were making the cosmos calculable, mappable, available to reason. And they were doing it in a tradition that drew on Greek mathematical astronomy, on Persian observational records, on Indian numerical innovations, on the accumulated astronomical knowledge of a dozen civilizations gathered along the Silk Road and synthesized into something new. The astrolabe on this table was made in Samarkand, its brass cast and worked and engraved by craftsmen who understood it as both a scientific instrument and a beautiful object, who saw no contradiction between these two things. The reti, the pierced overlay that rotates to show the positions of the named stars, is cut into an intricate pattern of tracery, so fine it seems barely possible in metal. Its structure both functional and decorative in a way that reflects a civilization that did not yet draw a sharp line between science and art. The astronomer who owns it lifts it now, holds it toward the lamp, and makes it spin slowly on its pin. The stars named on the reti will pass in their prescribed relationships to each other, and for a moment you have the sensation of watching the sky itself in miniature, the whole night sky contained in a circle of polished brass small enough to hold in one hand. On the desk beside the astrolabe, a large sheet of parchment is weighted at its corners with smooth stones. It is a map, not a modern map, not a map that would be legible to eyes trained on satellite imagery and precise cartography. It is a medieval Islamic map, one of a tradition that depicted the world with south at the top rather than north, with the known world arranged around the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean in shapes that are recognizable but deeply unfamiliar, like hearing a melody played in a different key. The coastlines are approximations. The distances are compressed and stretched by the limits of what the mapmaker could know. But it is trying. It is trying earnestly and ambitiously, and with all the information available to it, to answer the simplest and most profound question a mind can ask about the world. What is its shape? Where does it go? What lies at its edges? The parchment is covered not just with coastlines and place names, but with annotations, the mapmaker's notes to himself and to the reader, observations about the character of different lands, the nature of different peoples, the products of different regions. It is a map of the world as knowledge, not just as geography. Maps like this traveled the road too, copied and recopied, annotated by each new owner, corrected and enriched by travelers who had been to places the previous copyist had only heard described. Each generation of map was slightly more accurate than the last, the collective knowledge of thousands of journeys slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely accumulating into a better understanding of the world's shape. The astronomer rolls the parchment carefully and ties it with a length of cord. The lamp is burning low. Outside, the city has grown quiet, the call to prayer long since faded into the deep settled silence of a city at night. You sit with all of this for a moment. The cross and the scroll, and the call to prayer, and the spinning astrolabe, and the map of the world rolled tight and tied with cord. All of them expressing the same deep human need, the need to understand. To make sense of the cosmos and one's place within it. To find, in the bewildering complexity of existence, some organizing principle that makes the vastness bearable and the darkness less than absolute. The Silk Road carried all of these answers westward and eastward simultaneously, and the world that received them was changed by them in ways that are still working themselves out. The lamp gutters and steadies and dims. The astrolabe is still. The parchment is rolled. The cross shadow has lengthened with the falling light until it covers most of the old stone floor. Outside, the stars have come out over the city, the same stars the astronomer calculates by, the same stars the navigator steered by in the open desert, the same stars that have watched this road from its beginning and will watch it long after every caravan that ever crossed it has been folded back into the earth. Let the quiet of this ancient city find you. Let the lamp burn down to nothing. The road has carried you a long way tonight, through desert and oasis, through city and camp, through the marketplace of goods and the marketplace of ideas. You have traveled in good company, with merchants and monks, with musicians and astronomers, with all the ordinary and extraordinary people who made this road what it was. Rest now. The stars are keeping watch. There is a particular quality to the goods that travel the furthest. They are never the heaviest things, never the most obvious things. They are the things that carry within themselves some concentrated essence of beauty or rarity or pleasure that justifies the extraordinary effort of moving them across thousands of miles of difficult ground. They are the things that make the people who receive them feel, briefly, that the world is larger and stranger and more generous than they had believed. They are the things that make the journey worth it. The amber arrives from the north, from the cold shores of the Baltic Sea where the ancient forests that once stood there left their resin behind in the earth, and the sea gives it back, piece by piece, grain by grain, in each storm that breaks over the beach. Baltic amber is 30 to 40 million years old, which means that when a merchant on the Silk Road held a piece of it up to the light, they were holding something formed before the first human hand existed to hold anything. They did not know this, of course. What they knew was that amber was warm to the touch in a way that no stone was warm, that it carried light through its depths like a trapped sunset, that it held sometimes within its golden interior the perfect preserved form of an insect, or a leaf, or a fragment of ancient bark, a window into a world that no longer existed. The amber necklaces on a merchant's cloth are each slightly different in color, ranging from pale yellow through deep honey to a warm translucent orange that is almost red. The pieces click softly against each other when the cloth is disturbed, a gentle percussive sound like very small stones in a slow stream. The merchant lets a potential buyer hold them, knowing that the feel of them in the hand does half the selling. That warmth against the palm is persuasive in ways that words cannot easily replicate. From the south and the east come the ivory pieces, and among them the chess sets. Chess itself had traveled the Silk Road, moving westward from India where it was born, changing as it traveled, its pieces and rules adapting to each new culture that received it and made it its own. By the time the game reached Persia, it had become something close to the chess we know, and Persian craftsmen had begun making boards and pieces in ivory and ebony that were objects of extraordinary craftsmanship in their own right. The Ivory Knight's horse was carved with a specificity that suggested the carver had spent time with real horses, had observed the angle at which they hold their heads and the particular tension of their necks. The king piece was tall and formal, and carried in its posture the slightly uneasy authority of someone who knows their power is both absolute and precarious. These sets traveled as gifts as much as trade goods, diplomatic offerings from one court to another objects that said, "We are sophisticated, we know this game, we wish to play with you." Then the scents arrive, and they change everything about the air. A rosewater distillery at the edge of a Persian town is operating in the early morning, which is when the roses must be processed, before the heat of the day opens the petals too far and drives off the most delicate of the volatile compounds that give rose its particular quality of smell. The roses are packed into copper stills, covered with water, and the fire is lit beneath them. As the water heats, steam rises through the petals, collecting their essence, traveling up through a curved copper neck and down through a cooling coil where it condenses back into liquid. What drips from the end of the coil is rose water, clear and faintly golden, carrying within it the concentrated soul of the flower. The smell of a working distillery surrounds you now, warm and sweet and slightly heady. The smell of roses, but also of something deeper than roses, something that roses become when you pay them the very serious attention of distillation. Persian rosewater was traded across the entire width of the Silk Road. It was used in cooking and in medicine and in perfumery and in the ritual preparation of the body, and its smell was considered by many cultures that encountered it to be among the most beautiful things the world offered. Caravans carried it in small stoppered flasks packed carefully in straw, because the smell it released if broken was simultaneously wonderful and conspicuous. And a merchant who lost a flask of rosewater to breakage would find the entire caravan knowing about it immediately. Among the other fragrant goods that traveled this road, myrrh was one of the oldest. A piece of myrrh resin, fresh from the tree that produced it, is the color of amber, a warm reddish brown, and as it dries it darkens and becomes opaque and develops a surface that cracks slowly, the way very old wood cracks, in long lines that follow the internal structure of the resin. If you press a thumbnail into a fresh piece, it leaves an impression. If you break it, the fresh surface releases the smell, complex and slightly medicinal and warm. The smell that has been used in ritual and embalming and incense and medicine for 5,000 years. The smell that biblical texts mention as a luxury worthy of kings. The smell that crosses every cultural boundary because it touches something in the human nervous system that is older than culture. The myrrh travels in cloth bags, the pieces wrapped to prevent breakage. Though even wrapped, they release enough of their smell to perfume everything around them. Merchants who dealt in myrrh always carried a trace of it on their clothing for months after handling it, a kind of inadvertent advertisement. The incense resins travel in similar fashion. Frankincense, the other great biblical resin, is lighter in color than myrrh and more consistently fragrant in its unburned state. Its smell clean and resinous and high and holy. The smell that more than any other single thing the ancient world associated with the presence of the divine. When it burns, it produces a white smoke that rises in long slow curls and carries the smell upward, dispersing it through whatever space it is burned in, transforming the air of a room or a temple into something charged and different from ordinary air. The incense trails that you follow now through the bazaar are the traces of this ancient practice. Small threads of white smoke rising from the vessels set at intervals along the covered walkway, their fragrance layering over each other until the air is thick with them. Amber and myrrh and frankincense, and oud, and a dozen other resins and woods and dried flowers, all of them burning together into something that has no single name, but that every person who encounters it recognizes immediately as the smell of ceremony, of significance, of human beings marking an occasion as important through the simple act of burning something beautiful. And in the fields beyond the last city, before the road descends toward the flat plains that lead eventually to the sea, the opium poppies are in late bloom. They are extraordinary to look at. The flowers are large, larger than most flowers have any right to be, their petals the color of bruised silk, pale mauve and deep purple, and occasionally the shocking scarlet of a variety that seems to have captured some of the sunset in its pigment. They move in the lightest wind with a slowness that seems deliberate, that seems to say, "Look at us. We know what we are." The pods beneath the petals, already swelling as the flowers fade, hold within them a substance that has been used medicinally for as long as human beings have been ill and in pain. A substance that the Silk Road carried west and east, and whose effects on the human body were known and documented by physicians and healers across the full length of the road. In the long low light of late afternoon, the poppy fields glow with a color that does not seem entirely real, that seems to belong to the landscape of sleep rather than of waking, their colors deep and saturated and slightly otherworldly, their movement in the breeze so gentle and so regular that watching them is itself a kind of rest. The road bends westward through the fields. The smell of incense is still faintly present on the evening air, mingling now with the cool, dry smell of the land itself. The last of the traders are making camp at the edge of the fields. A fire is being built. Somewhere behind you, further east, a dozen cities are still awake and trading and praying and arguing and making music. But here, at the edge of the poppy fields, the world is very quiet, and the road turns toward the sea. The night has deepened to its furthest point. This is the hour when the sky seems to lean closer to the earth, when the stars seem not simply present but attentive, as though the darkness itself is aware of the small warm creatures moving through it. The caravan has stopped. The animals are still. The only sound is the occasional creak of a loaded saddle settling, the quiet breath of the sleeping camp, and the vast, dimensionless silence of the desert pressing in from every side. This is the hour when the sky shows you things. The comet appeared 3 nights ago, first noticed by the navigator as a faint smear of light in the western sky, just after sunset, dismissed initially as an artifact of tired eyes, then confirmed the following evening as something real and growing. By the 3rd night it was unmistakable, a bright nucleus trailing a tail of luminous dust that spread across several degrees of sky, pointing back along its own path like a road sign in the heavens. Comets were not well understood by the travelers of the ancient and medieval world, but they were not simply feared either. Their strangeness was acknowledged fully. They arrived without warning. They moved against the fixed patterns of the sky. They came from somewhere beyond the known and returned there in their own time. But in a world already full of things that moved without apparent cause, a comet was simply another mystery to be observed and noted and spoken about around the fire. Some travelers believed them omens. Others treated them as navigational aids, using the direction of the tail to orient themselves when clouds obscured the stars. Others simply watched them with the uncomplicated attention of people who have learned to find beauty in things they do not understand. You watch it now, the nucleus burning steadily at the western horizon, its tail sweeping upward and slightly curved, like the feather of some impossibly large bird crossing the sky in slow motion. It gives enough light to cast a faint shadow on the sand if you hold your hand toward it. This seems impossible, and yet it is true. You move your hand, and the shadow moves with it, the most delicate shadow in the world, barely there, barely not there. Follow it, you think. Let it guide you toward the water. And then, on the southern horizon, something else appears. The travelers from China and Central Asia who ventured far enough south along the road's branches, or who stood in the desert on very clear nights in the right season, sometimes reported a formation of stars they had no name for in their northern star catalogues. For stars, arranged in a compact cross, sitting low on the southern horizon, and never rising high enough to be mistaken for any of the familiar northern constellations. The Southern Cross, though it would not receive that common name for many centuries, was to these travelers simply a feature of the far south sky, present only for certain months, and only visible at all from latitudes south of the main road's northern stretches. But what they described in their accounts, always, was the same thing. The way the 4 stars held their shape, how their arrangement had a clarity and a completeness that seemed deliberate, that seemed to say, here is a form. Here is a pattern that the sky made on purpose. The 2 bright stars of the longer axis pointed reliably toward the south celestial pole, making the cross as useful for navigation in the southern hemisphere as Polaris was in the north. A perfect mirror of the guidance available above. You watch it now where it sits at the edge of the visible sky, just above the horizon, its 4 points steady. There is something about a cross of light in a dark sky that the human eye finds immediately and completely. It holds your attention without effort, without demand. You simply look at it, and it looks back, and no further transaction is required. The night deepens further. And then, at the edge of the northern horizon, where the sky meets the dark silhouette of distant mountains, something begins. It is nothing at first. A faint brightening, the color of moonrise but lower and more diffuse, more spread across the sky. Then it strengthens, and the color changes, moving through pale gold into green, a deep shimmering green that has no equivalent in the daytime world, a green that belongs only to the high cold upper atmosphere when it is excited by something arriving from beyond the earth itself. The green spreads and shifts, moving with a slowness that is almost geological, rising and falling in curtains that seem almost solid, almost tangible, as though you could reach up and gather them in your hands. Desert travelers at high altitude and high latitude sometimes reported lights like these, and their accounts were vivid with the difficulty of describing something for which their language had no prepared vocabulary. They reached for comparisons: waterfalls of light, silk draped across the sky, the reflection of a fire so large it must be burning beyond the horizon. None of these comparisons are wrong exactly, but none of them quite capture the quality of the light itself, which is not like anything else, which is simply its own phenomenon. The sky lit from within by a process so far above the earth that the mountains themselves are small beneath it. You lie back on the warm sand and let the lights move above you. They do not ask anything of you. They are simply happening, as they have happened above this desert on certain nights for as long as there has been a desert and an atmosphere above it, and a sun sending its charged particles against the magnetic field of the earth. You are simply here to witness them, which is perhaps the simplest and most complete thing a human being can do. The green deepens and then fades slowly, leaving behind it a sky that seems, if possible, even darker and more full of stars than it was before. The comet is still there, its tail sweeping upward. The Southern Cross holds its position above the horizon, and Polaris, faithful as ever, sits above the northern mountains exactly where it has always been. You have been carried a very long way tonight. You have crossed deserts and passed through cities and sat with musicians and astronomers and craftsmen and monks. You have smelled spice and incense and rosewater. You have heard the call to prayer and the sound of a ney flute fading into silence and the wolves calling to each other across the cold dark of the desert. And now the sky is showing you everything it has. Let it show you. Let your eyes close slowly under these ancient lights. The mountains are ahead, but they can wait until you are ready. The mountains have been present for days as a distant suggestion, a darkening of the horizon that might have been cloud, or might have been something more permanent. Now they are here, fully here, rising on all sides with a directness that makes the desert, which seemed so vast and so absolute, seem in retrospect like a kind of antechamber. The pass is narrow, and the path that leads to it is steep, cut into the rock face in a series of long traversing switchbacks that the engineers of a dozen generations have maintained and improved, shoring up the outer edge where the rock has crumbled, cutting steps where the gradient becomes too sharp for laden animals to manage without assistance. By day this would be difficult and spectacular. At night, in the full light of a moon that is 3 days past full and still bright enough to read by, it is something else entirely. The moonlight on the mountains is not the same as moonlight anywhere else. At altitude, the air is thinner and the light passes through it differently, arriving harder and more directional than it does in the lowlands, casting shadows with an edge that sunlight in thicker air rarely produces. The snow on the higher peaks above you is lit so brightly it seems to generate its own light, each crystal surface catching and returning the moonlight with a precision that makes the snowfields glow from within. The rock faces between the snow patches are a deep blue-grey, their texture exaggerated by the raking light, every crack and ledge and mineral vein made visible. The caravan moves in silence through this landscape. This is not the comfortable silence of the desert camp or the settled quiet of the oasis evening. This is the silence of altitude and cold, and the profound humility that certain landscapes impose on the creatures moving through them. The mountains are not indifferent to the caravan. They are simply on a scale that makes the caravan's presence neither significant nor insignificant. Simply present, the way a single note is present in a very long piece of music. Your breath makes small clouds in the cold air. The sound of your boots on the stone path is the clearest sound in the world, each footfall precise and deliberate and complete. The animal in front of you picks its way forward with a careful attention that is its own kind of meditation, each hoof placed with consideration, each shift of weight tested before it is committed to. You follow its example. You place each foot with care. You do not hurry. You cannot hurry here. The moon moves slowly overhead, its light shifting as it moves, picking out different features of the landscape with each degree of its passage. A frozen waterfall on the cliff face above the path, its suspended motion arrested in the cold, catches the light for a few minutes and then passes into shadow. A boulder balanced at the edge of the path, placed there by some geological event so ancient that the path was built around it rather than moving it, glows briefly and then darkens. The snow on the pass above, which has been bright since you began the ascent, seems to intensify as you approach it, as though it is preparing to receive you. At the highest point of the pass, the wind arrives. Not a violent wind. Not the wind that scours and blinds and forces travelers to their knees in the worst of the mountain crossings. Just a steady, clean, cold wind that comes from the west, from the far side of the mountains, carrying with it the smell of a different altitude zone, a different climate, a different part of the world. It moves through you, this wind, finding the spaces between your thoughts and the spaces between your layers of clothing. And what it carries from the far side of the mountains is the thing you have been traveling toward for all these weeks and months. The smell of distance. The smell of the rest of the world. You stand at the top of the pass for a moment and let the wind move through you. Below, on the western side of the mountains, the descent begins. The path switches back down through a landscape that is softer than what you climbed through, the rock giving way more quickly to soil, and then to the first low scrub, and then to the trees that speak of lower altitude and more rainfall, and a world that is turning, slowly but unmistakably, toward the Mediterranean and the sea. The moonlight follows you down. It will be with you all the way to the bottom of the pass, patient and steady and uncommonly beautiful, turning the ordinary rock of the path into something silver and significant, something worthy of the journey. Step by step, one foot, then the other. The mountains hold you as you pass through them, as they have held every traveler who has come this way before you, as they will hold every traveler who comes after. They do not distinguish between the silk merchant and the pilgrim, the ambassador and the runaway, the philosopher and the trader in spice. The mountains simply hold them all in their enormous indifferent grace, and let them pass, and close behind them, and wait for the next one. You are almost through. The descent continues, the path gentling as the altitude drops, the wind softening as the mountains rise behind you. The temperature rises, slowly, degree by degree. The trees grow taller. Somewhere far below, a river is making its way through a valley. Its sound not yet audible, but its presence somehow already felt. The faint moisture in the air that speaks of water moving in the dark. The mountains are behind you now. You have crossed them. The road ahead is open and descending, and the moon is still with you, still lighting every stone. Let your steps grow lighter as the path grows easier. Let the cold of the high pass fall away. You have almost arrived. There is a moment before dawn when the darkness changes. It does not become light, not yet. It simply becomes a different quality of dark. A dark that is aware of what is coming. A dark that has already begun the long, slow process of yielding. The stars at the eastern horizon are the first to respond, their light thinning almost imperceptibly as the sky behind them warms from black to a blue so deep it is almost black itself. A blue that holds within it the memory of night and the first whispered suggestion of day. You have been traveling all night. The road has carried you from the gates of Chang'an to the edge of the sea, through deserts and over mountains, through the bazaars of great cities and the quiet camps of nomads, through the conversations of merchants and monks, through the music of lutes and flutes, and the far-carrying call to prayer. You have seen the Milky Way arching over the Taklamakan, and a comet trailing its luminous tail across the western sky. You have smelled the rosewater distilleries of Persia, and the incense trails of the covered markets, and the cold, clean air of mountain passes in moonlight. The road has given you everything, and now the sky is giving you dawn. It begins at the horizon as a warmth rather than a color, a faint amber deepening along the line where the earth meets the sky, so gradual at first that you might mistake it for the last of the moonlight. But it is not the last of anything. It is the first light of a new day finding its way over the curve of the earth, traveling toward you as it has traveled every morning since the morning the world began. The amber deepens to gold. The gold spreads upward, slowly, the way warmth spreads through a cold room when a fire is lit, not in a rush but with a steady, patient expansion that reaches every corner in its own time. The deep blue of the pre-dawn sky retreats before it, first at the horizon and then higher, the stars fading one by one as the brightening sky absorbs them, not extinguishing them, but simply drawing them back into the light from which they are always made. A bird calls somewhere in the trees below the mountain road. A single note, clear and unhurried, the first voice of the new day, establishing itself in the silence before the rest of the world wakes to join it. It calls again, then waits, then calls a third time, and this time the silence that follows is filled, faintly, with answering calls from other birds further away, the sound of the living world stirring, remembering itself beginning. The road ahead, in the growing light, is visible for the first time in its full length. It descends from the foothills toward a wide plain, and at the edge of the plain, barely visible still, a long silver line catches the earliest light and holds it. The sea, the Mediterranean, or its near equivalent in the long geography of this journey, the great body of water that was the western edge of the road's ambition, the place where the silk and the spice and the jade and the philosophy and the prayer and the music all arrived finally, after their thousands of miles of traveling, and were absorbed into the world that waited there. The sea is still, and the light on it is the color of old bronze, the color of the astrolabe, the color of the brass scale weights of the spice merchants, the color of the amber beads clicking softly on their silk cord. It is the color of things that have lasted. You stop where you are and simply look at it. There is no need to go further. The journey is complete, or rather, the journey has always been complete, has been complete at every moment along its length, because a journey is not only its destination. It is every step, every night, every fire lit in the desert cold, every song half heard from the edge of a sleeping camp, every star used as a guide, and every star simply noticed for being beautiful. The camel bells, which you have carried with you in your hearing since the very first morning of this journey, ring once, softly, and then are still. The dawn is fully here now, the sky washed clean of everything except light, the world returning to itself after the long night, the road stretching away in both directions, east and west, lit and patient and entirely available. Let your eyes close if they wish to. The light will still be here. The road will still be here. And somewhere between where you began and where you have arrived, in all the space that the journey has moved through, in all the quiet accumulated beauty of the long night's traveling, something has been given to you that you will carry without effort and without weight for as long as you carry anything. The gift of having traveled, the gift of distance covered and beauty witnessed, and the deep, unhurried peace of arrival. Let it settle. Let it hold you. The dawn is warm, and the road is still, and the sea is catching the first full light of morning. Sleep now. You are home. The Silk Road was never simply a road. It was a living thing, a thing built and rebuilt and shifted and renamed over 2,000 years by the millions of individual human decisions to take the next step, to cross the next desert, to carry something beautiful from one end of the known world to the other and offer it to strangers. What those travelers built between them, without intending to, without any single person overseeing the whole of it, was the first great network of human civilization, the first proof that the world's different peoples, given sufficient reason and sufficient courage, would reach across every boundary of language and faith and culture to find each other. The silk and the jade and the spice and the glass were how they reached. The ideas and the prayers and the mathematics and the music were what they found. And what remains of it now, in the architecture of ancient cities and the flavor of traded spices and the instruments that still play scales that traveled westward from the east, is the record of what human beings can do when they choose movement over stillness, curiosity over fear, and the open road over the closed horizon. Every journey that has ever been taken carries within it the memory of this one. Every traveler who has ever set out toward the unknown in the hope of finding something worth bringing home has walked, in some sense, the same road. It is still there. It has always been there. And on certain quiet nights, when the stars are bright and the air is dry and the darkness holds the particular quality of great open spaces under a clear sky, you can almost hear it, the sound of bells and hooves, and the wind moving over ancient sand, the sound of the world in motion, carrying everything worth carrying toward everyone who is waiting to receive it. The road goes on. It always has. It always will. Good night, and have a great, relaxing sleep.